All right, so just a little bit about me. I am currently the emergency coordinator for the Eastern Kern County ARES here in California. But before I came up here, I was down in Orange County, California, where I was an assistant emergency coordinator with a group down there known as Hospital Disaster Support Communications System of Orange County. And this is an interesting group, and I'll talk a little bit about it later, but let's talk about what happened on this fateful day. So I'm going to start by setting the scene for what's going on. This is a while ago, almost 20 years ago, but it was April 23rd in 2002. And we were preparing for well, it was an Orange County annual countywide EMS or emergency medical service drill. This is a pretty big event in Orange County, the annual event. It involves quite a few different organizations. And we're talking about, the county's divided into four nets, and those are hospital nets. And this involves what's called the North County hospitals, the North County net. It involves the Orange County Fire Authority. It involves Orange County Sheriff's Department. There's city police departments. There's ambulance companies, Red Cross, our group, HDSCS, and Orange County RACES. It's a big deal, and the annual event. And what the event is about is getting the hospitals accreditation. They're getting their certifications through the Joint Commission. That's why we hold these drills. So the scenario that was to unfold that day was hosted by the fire department from the city of Brea. So it took place in the city of Brea, which is in North County. The scenario of the drill was a terrorist event, and the terrorists had commandeered a fuel tanker and crashed it into a busy shopping center. That's the scenario. So early that morning, everybody's getting set up. The drill is set to begin at 9:15 a.m. The Red Cross, their participation, they do what is called a moulage. If you've ever participated in like a mass casualty drill, they will do makeup on the volunteer victims. This is called moulage. And so the victims, 100 volunteer victims out there getting ready for this drill, and everybody's all set and ready to go. Things are proceeding as planned. All the first responders, and this is the fire, police, sheriff, ambulance companies, the hospitals, everybody is set and staged and ready for the drill to start. Well, HDSCS, we pre-stage. So we are assigned ahead of time, we are assigned a hospital that we will be deployed to during the drill. And we stand off from the hospital. We don't want them to see us. We don't want them to know that we're there, because we want it to be as realistic as possible. So we pre-stage. We're somewhere out of sight from the hospital. We don't go and park in their parking lot and wait for them to call us. We go park somewhere else. When they activate us, we get a call over the radio, and then we go to the hospital. That's the way it works. So we're all sitting around waiting for our assigned hospitals. Myself, I'm sitting in the drive-through at Jack in the Box getting breakfast, waiting for my breakfast. It was pretty early in the morning. So let me tell you a little bit about HDSCS, Hospital Disaster Support Communication System. HDSCS unfortunately no longer exists. It was a former ARES group, and I can just read this off. It's dedicated to providing internal and external communications for critical medical facilities in Orange County, California, whenever normal communications are interrupted. And we provide, the other way to look at our mission statement was providing communications critical to patient care, was the whole idea. HDSCS was founded in 1980 with one hospital, St. Jude in Fullerton. Over its lifetime, it grew to support all receiving hospitals and some additional medical facilities in Orange County, 35 in all. And that includes the 3 trauma centers in Orange County. So all receiving hospitals, 35 of them. We had over 100 members in the group. And our response plan, we had members assigned as what we called a core response. The core response meant you were assigned to a specific hospital that was either near where you lived or near where you worked. And in my case, Fullerton was, well, in those days, I wasn't living in Fullerton. St. Jude was in Fullerton, but I worked in Fullerton. So I was assigned to St. Jude. That was my core response. Some statistics on HDSDS. In the course of the 38 years of existence, we had 124 activations for hospitals experiencing communications failures. We had 219 drills that we participated in. And these included, some of the drills included these mass casualty drills. We also supported the Orange County Airport, the John Wayne Airport, for their certification that they would do every other year. That was an interesting drill, of course, and the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station. They had to go through a drill every other year. We supported that as well. So we did a lot of interesting stuff. But we also did 125 what we call standby operations. And the standby operations occur when you're doing a phone cutover. You might be having a planned power outage or something like that. These are the kinds of things. This is a planned phone system outage. So hospitals depend on their phone systems for communications and for paging. You know, when the phone system's down, your paging system's down. So we would do a standby where we'd put people in the hospital to supplement their communication system during those cutovers. Well, we're going to talk about a fateful radio call. It's 8:15 a.m. on that date. Our members are deployed, they're pre-deployed. We have a member at the drill site who is getting ready for the drill to begin. It's supposed to start at about an hour. And she comes on our main repeater and says, stand by, there is a potential real MCI in progress. So at the same time, I'm sitting over there at Jack in the Box waiting for my breakfast in the drive-thru, and I'm listening to the local news broadcast from KNX, our big news station here in LA and Orange counties. And they come on, they say, we're getting word that there's been a commuter train accident in Orange County, but they don't have any details at this point. Our net control operator for our part in the drill, HDSCS, is monitoring what's called the OC HearNet. Orange County HearNet is the hospital emergency radio net, and this is a VHF network that ties all the hospitals together. It's basically as we would have a network, radio network, FM, and it allows the emergency operations center to contact the hospitals to contact each other via radio. This is one of their communications channels. What our net control is hearing is that there are 911 calls starting to come into the EOC from the accident site. They're hearing this over the HearNet. So they're preparing the hospitals for what's coming. So we've got these 911 calls coming in, and suddenly what comes in is an MCI call, mass casualty incident. And on our repeater, we hear, this is not a drill, this is not a drill. And we immediately activated, and our members were instructed to report to their assignments. So I got my breakfast by this time. So it got thrown on the floor of the truck, and I headed off to St. Jude. I never had a chance to eat that at that point. So I head off to St. Jude and find out what my duties are there. So let me tell you a little bit about the accident itself. This is a map of the location. This is what's called Atwood it's the Atwood area of Placentia, California in Orange County. And there was a westbound Metrolink, this is a passenger train with one locomotive and 3 cars with 300 passengers. So it's heading westbound, and it's about to take this turn that takes it down south to San Juan Capistrano, going down the coast towards San Diego. That's its destination, is San Juan Capistrano down the coast. At the same time, on the same track, there's an eastbound freight train, 67 cars, 3 locomotives, almost 6,000 tons of train. 6,000 tons. At a few seconds after 8:10 a.m., these two met head on in the city of Placentia. And you can see this is where they met, right here, right at that crossing. Believe it or not, this location is roughly 6 miles from the drill site. So the drill is immediately canceled. The drill is immediately canceled. But what's even more interesting is the Placentia Fire Department was conducting an exercise just a couple of blocks away from this accident. So they were absolutely the first on the scene. Within minutes, they had people on the scene. And they were able to give situational awareness SA reports back to the county EOC. So a little on the county EOC, I want to share a little bit about that. This is the county EOC, Orange County Emergency Operations Center, located on Loma Ridge, and it's a big communications center. This is operated by the Sheriff's Department Emergency Communications Bureau, and it is also the 911 call center. It's the primary 911 call center for Orange County. And this is through something called Control One. Control One, which you see the photo of there, this is where their dispatch operations take place for law enforcement, fire, and paramedics. And there's an ambulance dispatch as well, med frequency. This also contains something called the central point. Now, the central point maintains the status of all the hospitals in Orange County via HERE and something called ReadyNet. Now, ReadyNet is a statewide network. It's computer-based. It used to be over microwave lengths. In those days, it was all microwave. Nowadays, it's over the internet. And if you recall, when Oliver did his talk on the shakeout, he was talking about the dashboard for the hospitals in LA County. And that's kind of what ReadyNet is. ReadyNet is a dashboard that tells you at a glance what the status of all your hospitals are. So it's giving status on the emergency department, and it's giving bed counts. So in the terms of the emergency department, how many immediate victims can you take? How many delayed victims can you take? How many minors can you take? This is important for the dispatch to know how to send in a mass casualty, to know where to send and where to send ambulances with victims. And of course, the EOC also has operating positions for Orange County races as well as HDSCS. We have an operator at the EOC who is in close contact with Central Point. That's our role up there. So now at St. Jude, the hospital I'm deploying to, pull in the parking lot, and I'm met by security immediately. They saw me pull in and they told me right where to park. They said, "You want to park right here." Now, believe it or not, that's right outside the entrance to the command post, which is located right there. And it was great for me because in those days, my go kit was pretty big and heavy and I had to carry it. I don't do that anymore, but I was a big Pelican case that probably weighed about 40 pounds with all my gear in it. So that was kind of nice. They parked us right by the entrance to where the command post, and that's actually the old emergency room entrance is where that is, the emergency department. That was the lobby for the emergency department. That's what they use for their command post. It's a good location within the hospital. So at the command post, typical command post, we're dealing with an evolving MCI. So things are busy. It is very busy. And to an outsider, if you were to walk in there and see this, it would look like it would be chaos, but it's organized chaos. It is chaotic, but it's organized chaos. But it's normal, and it's a textbook application of the Hospital Emergency Command System, ICS, HICS. So we're set up. I immediately rendezvous with our other communicator. We had another communicator that was going on site, and that's John, N6NVR. He was there. We hooked up with the disaster management coordinator, who, by the way, happened to be a member of HDSCS also, but he was working that particular day. He wasn't on the radio, but he was the disaster management coordinator, one of our members, and a ham. So we meet with him, and he briefed us on what was going on at the hospital. Now, what's going on is they've got some problems. They've got big problems. Their internal communications are disrupted. Their staff normally carries handy talkies. They're not working, so they're using runners. This is a very slow process. Now, why are their radios not working? Well, probably because somebody forgot to put them back in the chargers. This is a real common problem. Sure, they've got radios, but do the radios work? Do they test them? Do they exercise and practice using those radios? Typically, they don't. So they've got problems. So the first thing that happens, now back in those days, we didn't have our official vests from the Orange County Healthcare Agency. We were issued vests by the hospital, showing we were communicators. And that's important because that shows that we belong there. We're somebody who belongs to the EOC. we're part of that team and we belong wherever we go to. For instance, John was assigned to the emergency department, and here he is standing outside the entrance. They're probably admitting a patient into the emergency department there. And that's John over there on the left side. Funny thing, John used to be my boss at Raytheon. We worked together. Anyway, he's assigned to the emergency department. I'm assigned to shadow the incident communicator, or incident commander, sorry. Now, what that means is that as a shadow communicator, I'm her shadow. I'm standing next to her all the time. Wherever she goes, I go. So I end up at the command post, and the first thing she does when I walked in, she saw me come in, she says, I want you sitting right here next to me. And so they put me at the desk right next to her. So in the meantime, we had established an internal, this is important, establishing an internal simplex frequency before that deployment. And you check your radios to make sure that simplex frequency works. What a mistake if you sign the frequency and you deploy and you try and talk to each other and something's not working. So we typically use 440 for an internal simplex frequency, 2 meters for external communications. So John and I deploy. I'm still at the command post now, and we're finding even more, things are getting worse as time goes on here at St. Jude. I mentioned the handy talkies aren't working, but their PBX, their phone system, is becoming overloaded. They're being flooded with calls. And you could imagine, people have seen this event take place on the news. They know that their family members and friends might be on the commuter train. And so they're calling to find out what's going on, because it's the only source of information they have, is to be able to call the hospital. So the external calls were jamming the PBX, but as you might imagine, internal calls were causing problems too. Departments, for instance, the emergency department trying to communicate with the command post was jamming the PBX as well. So things were really deteriorating. Now, I mentioned outsiders. Yeah, people outside the hospital, they're requesting information on loved ones. So, to make matters worse, and how could it possibly be worse? The emergency department, expecting a large number of victims to be brought to the hospital, because we were fairly close. We're actually closer than the drill site to the accident site. They've set up a portable trauma center, what they call a trauma trailer. So this is where they're doing triage for incoming victims from the site. They've set this up, but they have no communications because their handy talkies aren't working. So they're expecting many victims to begin arriving. So we've got to come up with a solution for this. John needs to stay at the emergency department. I need to stay at the command post. So what do we do? Well, it's pretty easy. Well, anyway, the comms between the ED and the triage, they could become critical, obviously, at some point. They're transferring information on and patients, victims of this accident. So the solution was really pretty simple. It just takes time. We requested a third operator to be deployed, which is a pretty typical situation you'd be in if you need some additional communicators. We're actually dealing with a lot of hospitals, so this is a test for HDSCS. It's a test. We asked for the third operator. So the net control gets on and dispatches a third member to St. Jude. Thankfully, our third member lived very close by. He also worked at Raytheon, where I worked, just down the street. So he got there within minutes. It was very, very quick to get there. And he was assigned to support that triage staff. And that was Dave, KE6NVJ. We gave him the internal frequency, checked his radios out, and he took his assignment. Of course, at the same time, you can imagine we've got all these hospitals getting activated and getting ready to receive patients. We're getting a lot of comms on our main repeater. Things are beginning to heat up. And thankfully, we do have access to multiple repeaters, and everybody is aware of those. Everybody is given instruction. Each of us has a handbook. The handbook has all the frequencies of all the repeaters, plus their tactical names. We never give out a frequency on the air. We always use tactical names. So our main repeater, main, was beginning to get jammed up. So we went off to, some of us were sent off to some of the other repeaters for other traffic. And this is very important to be able to keep the traffic flowing, is to have access to multiple frequencies, because you can imagine an event like this, there was a lot of traffic going on, a lot of craziness. So here I am shadowing the incident commander. She's interested in what's going on at the other hospitals. So the first thing she tells me is don't use headphones. Typically, I mean, that's standard practice. If you're in a command center, incident command center, you want to wear a pair of headphones. One, so you can hear what's going on the radio yourself because it's a noisy place, but also you don't want your radio to disrupt what's going on in the command post. Well, she asked me to leave my headphones off because she wanted to hear personally what was going on at the other hospitals over the ham radios over our network. Well, you know, you think about it, normal channels might not provide the type of data that we can provide through ham radio. We've got boots on the ground at the other hospitals. We've got firsthand situational awareness of what's happening elsewhere that they might not be able to get any other way. So, like I said, I'm sitting right next to the incident commander. Don't use the headphones. And we do provide a different perspective on activities. You know, they're used to their normal channels of communications, such as I mentioned here in ReadyNet, as well as their phone systems. But we can provide them with other intelligence on what's going on elsewhere in the incident, including the accident site. We may have somebody at the accident site. Actually, in this type of an accident, the accident site was active for such a short period of time, we never deployed anyone there. But I will share a story about someone who was very close to it in a minute. I'll tell you what happened to him. Let's see. In Hicks, part of that is the incident commander, their job is to integrate and interpret all this incoming intelligence, make decisions on what they're going to do. And so we add, as amateurs, we add an additional channel of information to them. Very important, very important. So what happens when an exercise turns real? Well, a little background here. Central Point was staged for the exercise. So the central point I mentioned, that's the hospital status, right? This is up at the Emergency Operations Center. They're staged getting ready for the exercise. They're planning to deal with the site, the exercise site, the drill site, calling in victims for transport to hospitals. That's what they're going to be doing. They're going to be watching the status of the hospitals. Who can take what when? In other words, who can take a victim by ambulance? So one mistake was made. One of the hospitals involved in the exercise reported over ReadyNet simulated conditions preparing for this drill. They reported they could take 50 immediate victims. This is PCCI. This is a patient count capacity inventory is the term. PCCI, 50 immediates. Now, if you know anything about a hospital emergency department, I mean, even the biggest trauma center couldn't handle that. Most emergency departments can handle maybe 5 immediates at a time, and that's really pushing it because each victim that comes in, you're going to have to assign staff to that, and it may take half a dozen staff members to support that victim or more. And you just run out of staff and you run out of staffing in your emergency department. So typical emergency department would be swamped immediately with 5 immediates. And of course, immediate means that these are the most critically injured people. These are the most critically injured victims are the immediates. So this is an abnormality. It's an anomaly that one hospital had set their PCCI to immediates equal to 50. Well, as the accident unfolded, the PCCI was not updated. And you can imagine what this caused. So control point or central point is dispatching the majority of immediates to that hospital. So you know, we have a responder on the accident scene, sometimes multiple responders, but a responder on the scene who is on MedCom, medical communications. He's talking to the control point, or I'm sorry, to the central point. Central point is giving him instructions to give to the ambulance driver as to where to go, what hospital to go to. So they're dispatching, as I mentioned, the majority of the immediates are going to that hospital. And I'm not going to mention the hospital, but the hospital has set its immediates for the drill. And Dan Sohn, you asked something about this the other day when Oliver was doing his talk. And I told you I'd talk about that in this presentation. And this is what happens. If they use fake data, in other words, artificial data, and fail to replace it, this can cause a catastrophe. So here we are sitting at St. Jude. We're going, it's incident command, emergency department is calling us and saying, Where are the victims? We haven't seen anybody. Where is everybody? We figured we'd be one of the first to get victims. Well, thanks to ham radio and a few other things, we figured out what the problem was. We got the thing straightened out. We got the unnamed hospital to update their PCCI with the correct data and get away from the drill data. And we started getting victims arriving at St. Jude, which is what we expected all along. And I want to talk a little bit about what kind of traffic goes on in this type of event. I'm not going to go into the details, but I'm going to go into what kind of stuff you expect to see. What we saw was, remember I mentioned we have a triage trailer sitting outside the emergency department. So some of the requests going back and forth on our 440 simplex channel for internal traffic are material requests. They're requesting materials for triage because they have limited supplies out there. So their material requests, the emergency department, as I mentioned earlier, may have staffing issues. So they're requesting additional nursing staff. That was one of the things they did. The other thing that popped up, which was interesting, is that there was an ER doctor, an ER MD who lived in the neighborhood, who heard about this on the news and drove to St. Jude to see if he could help. Well, unless he's accredited at St. Jude, he can walk in the door, but that's all he can do. He can't actually participate. So we did a request via radio to get him through the incident command to get him certificated as a volunteer MD in the ER. So that was something we helped them bolster their staffing in the emergency department. So this is kind of critical stuff. And of course, the other thing I mentioned earlier, patient counts, knowing how many beds are available in the emergency department, how many beds are available in the hospital altogether. These are important pieces of information for the incident commander to understand, and recognizing that the other communications channels within the hospital are not really working very well. Then before we got there, they were doing this with runners, you can imagine. Now we're doing this all by radio, and essentially we had a whiteboard set up in the incident command, and we had a chart up there with all the patient counts, and we could keep that updated in real time as the traffic came in. So that was good stuff. Externally, we're on 2 meters. I mentioned that earlier, that we're on a 2 meter, one of multiple 2 meter repeaters. I mentioned the request for an additional communicator. This is some of our external traffic. And of course, we're providing external traffic with that patient care capacity inventory for the EMS, for emergency medical services, up at that central point. We were giving them the same data, basically the same data, should they not be able to get it in a timely fashion. We had it in real time right from the incident command post. We could give it by radio to the central point and let them know what the numbers are in real time, which they necessarily couldn't do with ReadyNet. So this helps expedite things. One of the things that happened during this event was the Placentia Police Department was trying to locate the engineer of the train, the freight train. Turns out he had jumped from the locomotive and had broken his leg. So he was a victim and had been transported. Well, we needed to find where he was. So the word had come in from the central point through our emergency radio operator at the EOC, asking us to interrogate the hospitals to see where this guy was. We were looking for the engineer. Well, we found him. That just took a matter of minutes. We tracked him down, and Placentia Police Department was notified, and they were trying to locate him to do an interview. We also had requests from Metrolink and the Red Cross. Now, Red Cross, we have an MOU with them, and that allows us to go on their repeaters during an event like this and ask for information from them. What we got from them were the Red Cross phone number, contact phone number, very important. We gave that to the hospitals so that they could give that number to folks calling in through their external phones. So that was an important piece of information to get in. The other thing that we requested, and we got that through the EOC, was the Metrolink number. So they had set up an emergency number for Metrolink for people to call in, for family members and what have you to call in. So in the aftermath of this event, this went on for it really didn't last that long, surprisingly. But once things settled down and things got back to normal, the hospital, of course, has a debrief. And they would have done this whether it was a drill or a real event as this was. They go through a debrief. And what happens in the debriefing is each of the departments it presents a report on what happened during the event, what went right, what went wrong. The preponderance of things went right, which was truly amazing. And I have a comment about that in a minute. But everything went right. You know, you think about it, they were already prepared for a mass casualty drill. So it's like, what changed? Nothing. They're still doing the same thing they would have been doing, except now they've got real victims instead of moulage volunteer victims, right? So these are real victims that are coming in from a real accident. So each department reports in, and the preponderance of reports were very positive, that things went exactly as they were supposed to go, that HICS was followed, and it worked very well. We were also asked to contribute, but they praised us for our contribution. The incident command had a lot of praise for our group. And this is not uncommon, and it happened throughout the day at all the other hospitals where HDSCS was involved. We got a lot of praise from our hospitals that we were there to help them out and give them the other information that they didn't have access to. Oh, and as another thing, we got fed a nice lunch, and it was hospital food, but it was good. We had a good lunch. They always took care of us. The hospitals would always feed us and take care of us, which is great. During drills, during standbys, any of these things, any of the planned outages, these types of things, they took care of us. So there's some takeaways from this. One of the interesting things was that I mentioned this, that it went as if it was a drill. Most of the people there indicated that it went as if it was a drill. And that word came in from a lot of people throughout the network, throughout the hospitals in our network, that it felt like a drill. It's like there was no difference. We drill with the hospitals all the time. We would do typically 4 drills a year with the hospitals in each of the 4 nets that I mentioned, the 4 county nets that I mentioned in the hospitals. Each had their own drill. So we had a lot of experience with those hospitals doing this, and the hospitals had a lot of experience with it as well. And the corollary of that is we really felt that we were part of their team. And they echoed that. They felt that we were part of their team as well. We fit right in with what they were doing. We became an integral part to their process, to their HICS. And it's interesting to note that HDSCS is actually written into their activation plan for HICS in Orange County from the for the emergency medical system. We were, I shouldn't say we were, the group doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. I'll talk a little bit about that. But we were part of their activation plan and their emergency response in Orange County. So that's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing what went on there. But all I can say, and take this to heart: drill like you work like you drill. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. That's why it felt like a drill. That's why, you know, when you drill all the time and you drill to how you would actually operate in a real MCI. And it was truly an incredible thing. And I've got more about that coming up too. There's some pretty interesting comments. Our response, HDSCS, this was our 75th communication emergency in 21 years, 75th communications emergency. We had 28 responders going to 14 hospitals in the EOC in Orange County. 28 of our members responded to those 14 hospitals. The communications we provided were critical, both internal and external communications for the hospitals. And I mentioned this before. I mean, some of the stuff that happened, we located easily, just without any problem at all, located the engineer. Within a matter of minutes, we figured out where he was. We were able to figure out what the problem was with ReadyNet, why St. Jude and other hospitals weren't getting any victims. The problem was identified and it was resolved, if I could speak English, resolved very quickly. There we go. And of course, we were able to track down the emergency phone numbers for both the Red Cross and for Metrolink. This is a more important stuff. And I mentioned the MOUs. The group had MOUs with the Red Cross, Orange County Red Cross, and the city and county RACES groups in Orange County. So we could have direct access to their nets, and they had direct access to our nets. So if they needed information, they would come to our main frequency and ask for information. Or if we needed information, we could go to their nets and ask for it. So this was interoperability, and we talk about interoperability being really important. This was a key thing, and always has been a key thing with our groups down in Orange County, is that interoperability between the multiple volunteer agencies in the county. This was great, and it works extremely well, and we practiced it a lot. So it worked extremely well when the real deal happens. But like I say, that gives us direct access to some critical information. Our response was by the book, and I like to say that it was exemplary by our volunteers. It was just an incredible response to what happened that day. And we were, HDSCS was an integral component of the Orange County Healthcare Agency's EMS. So let me talk a little bit about the incident itself, the statistics, what happened. So the incident lasted 4.5 hours. That's not very long for a mass casualty incident with over 300 passengers on a Metrolink. 264 of those passengers were injured, as well as one firefighter had a minor injury. 164 of those victims were transported by ambulance to local hospitals. Unfortunately, there were 2 fatalities. One was at the scene, one was en route. It happened to be en route to our hospital, St. Jude, unfortunately. But it's surprising to me that there weren't more, frankly. I'll talk about some of the contributing factors to that in a minute, but here's something that's kind of amazing. All critical victims. And what do I mean by critical? Critical are those who are in life-threatening situations, right? They're life-threatening injuries, critical injuries. They've been transported in less than an hour. That means they were extricated, triaged, stabilized, and then transported to a hospital in less than an hour. You've heard the term the golden hour. There it is right there. Consider an incident the size of this, with that many victims, to have all critical victims off the accident site within 1 hour is remarkable. And the only reason that happened is because we were preparing for a mass casualty drill 6 miles away. Had that not been happening, had that drill not been happening, these statistics might have been quite different. But considering the Placentia Fire Department was right around the corner, that we had a huge mass of first responders 6 miles away in the same spot. They weren't scattered all over the county. They were all in one location. They just picked up and moved to the accident scene. And we had 55 ambulances had been dispatched. Those are actually dispatched for the drill. They had been sitting waiting for the drill to happen. We also had 3 buses that transported the minor injuries. And the uninjured passengers were transported by bus back to their initiating stations by the transit company. Unfortunately, I will also add that 45 days later, a 3rd victim succumbed from injuries from the accident. So we actually had 3 fatalities total. To this day, this remains the single largest mass casualty incident in the history of Orange County. It was pretty harrowing, but 4.5 hours. This is, to me, it's incredible. Now, I mentioned something that happened to one of our communicators. Looking at that picture and the traffic on, I think that's Placentia Boulevard there, I believe. Basically, the police department closed down the street. He happened to be in the traffic reporting to his hospital, which happened to be just a couple of blocks away also. So per our training in HDSCS, the police department had shut down the street. So he's stuck in traffic. He pulled out into the opposing lanes and drove up to the roadblock. He had out his driver's license and he had out his ID card from Orange County, the healthcare agency, emergency medical services, that we are first responders with EMS. He showed that to the police officer, and the police officer waved him through. That's all it took. Didn't have to explain what he was doing. You know, he says, I am, other than the fact that he's reporting to the hospital that's just like right down the street, which I think in those days was Placentia Linda, it was just down the street, just a few blocks away. That's all he did. He didn't explain that he was a ham radio operator. He didn't say anything about what was going on. He just says, I need to get to this hospital. Here's my credentials. And they let him through. Very important. That's a very important takeaway if you're involved in this type of thing. Countless times that's happened, that we've been stopped at roadblocks while on the way on a call out, and just those simple actions of identifying yourself with a driver's license and identifying yourself with a badge from the healthcare agency and explaining that we're going to this hospital, assisting with an event. That's all it takes. So a little bit on the aftermath of the accident investigation itself. I want to talk about that. About a year and a half later, in October, the NTSB publishes a report on the collision. This is a copy of the cover of the document. And I'm not going to go into all these details. These are the identifiers of the freight train and the passenger train 809. That was the Metrolink was the passenger train, obviously. It occurred on track 2 at what's called Control Point Atwood in Placentia. You saw that. That's actually that photograph, that aerial photograph. That's the location there, track 2. Both trains were on the same track. The Metrolink was on track 2 because it was going to be going south away from that main line. Somehow the freight was on the same line, but their statistics say that there were, I talked about 164 transports. They said 162 victims were transported to local hospitals with 2 fatalities. So one of those fatalities was 163, and the firefighter that was injured was 164. So the numbers are in agreement, thankfully. The damage to the facilities and trains was estimated at $4.6 million. Probable cause: freight train crew inattentiveness to a signal at milepost. So these guys were talking to crew. This is the conductor and the engineer are in the cab. They're talking about something not work related. The engineer had asked for a status on the signal, and the conductor indicated that it was clear. Well, it turns out that it was yellow. That signal light was yellow, which means slow to 30. At the same time, the engineer is accelerating to 50 miles per hour. When they finally hit, see, the yellow light that's a warning that says, yeah, you're going to be having to slow down because you're going to be coming to a stop ahead. So up ahead, there's a red light. 90 seconds later, he's approaching a red light at 50 miles an hour. No way he could stop. There was no way he could stop. The other thing that they talk about is something called positive train control. And this has been a big discussion out here with Metrolink for a long, long time, and all across the country for that matter with commuter trains. Positive train control means that it would have been an automatic system that could have stopped the train before the accident occurred. Now, one of the things that did occur is that the engineer on the Metrolink saw the approaching freight train not stopping, and he went back into the car and told people to move to the back and to brace themselves. So he's probably responsible for saving a lot of lives there. But one contributing thing that I've read this report and I didn't see anything in it, but this is a real common complaint about the Metrolink here in LA. If you noticed in that photograph, the locomotives on the Metrolink are at the rear. It's a pusher. So had the train been going the other way, in other words, been turned around the other way with the engines at the front, the locomotive at the front of the train, rather than at the rear, the damage probably would have been a lot less. And probably the injuries would have been a lot less because the locomotive would have absorbed the impact rather than that lead car, which is called the cab car. That's where there's a control cab at the front of that car that's tied into the locomotive at the rear of the train. There have been a lot of serious accidents with these pushers out here, and typically it result in some serious derailments. You saw that there was a derailment, but it wasn't that serious, but the cars were pretty crumpled up. But what I have to say, there's some good news that came out of this report, and I want to echo this one, because the good news is they said there was a conclusion that the emergency response to this incident was timely, effective, and appropriate. And I think that's pretty awesome. That's the entire Orange County emergency response. That's the fire department, Orange County Fire Authority, the police departments, the sheriff's department, the ambulance companies, the hospitals. Everything was characterized in the report as being appropriate, timely, and effective. And I think that's a great statement. And yeah, had we not been doing a drill that day, I don't know that would have been the same statement, but we might not have had the same results. There might have been a lot more fatalities, a lot more serious. Well, the injuries would have been the same, but we might have had a lot more fatalities. I will mention the 2 fatalities were caused by these particular Metrolink cars have a tray, like a table, that has 2 opposing seats. So it's like a seating for 4 people with a table between them. And the 2 victims were on that train was heading west, so they would have been on the east side of the table. So when the trains hit, they were shoved into the table, and they received some pretty serious abdominal injuries from the table. So that was something that was made a point of in the NTSB report, that's one of the things that they want, that they're still looking at over time, as to how to respond to that, how to maybe make some changes to make that a little bit more survivable, because that was definitely a serious situation. But that's something that did come out of this accident and several others. One thing is that the HDSCS was recognized by the Orange County Healthcare Agency Emergency Medical Services. We were given a certificate of recognition, and that was for our response to the commuter train collision in Placentia, California. That was pretty cool. So, like I said, we were an integral part of their EMS. So, closing out here, I want to give you a postscript about HDSCS. In October of 2018, the group became unsustainable. Our emergency coordinator, our leader, April Mell, WA60PS, had been the leader continuously for the 38 years of existence of this group. She was the leader that entire time. It had become unrealistic for her to continue because she had some multiple medical issues occurring, and she was just not capable to keep leading the group, which was unfortunate because she was the one person who had the connections into the healthcare agency in Orange County. She was a physical therapist at St. Jude Hospital, where this all started. And that's where HDSCS began, was at St. Jude. But trying to find a replacement for her, we had a lot of, I mentioned we had 100 members. We have dedicated and capable members, but nobody had the time or experience. Nobody had the connection into the healthcare agency to be able to sustain the group as we did. And so that's a takeaway here also, is that it's very important to have that resource. April was critical to HDSCS. Without her, HDSCS could not function. And so as a result, in October of 2018, it was abandoned and becoming unsustainable, and it was shut down. What's interesting, though, is a new group has emerged, which is something to be thankful for if you live in Orange County. It's called the Orange County Health Emergency Amateur Radio Team, OC HEART. And they have created what they call rapid response teams, not unlike our core team response that we had at HDSCS. And they have recruited many former members from HDSCS, which is great because that gives them a trained, ready to go organization, ready to jump in and work. And they continue to forge their relationships with and support the hospitals in Orange County. Well, that's great. I was so happy to hear this happen. So there is going forward, there is a group that is supporting the hospitals down in OC, and I'm happy to see that. Even I don't live in OC anymore. Lisa and I live in Kern County now. We're very isolated out here. We don't have the luxury of having HDSCS out here, but we've got a great team. Our areas team is second to none out here. I really appreciate all that they do for us. Well, I'm going to ask you, if you have time, check out our websites. Check out the HDSCS website, hdscs.org. It talks a little about the shutdown, but it talks a lot about the history and some of the stuff that's taken place. over the years, those 38 years of HDSCS existence. And OC Heart, I would send you to their website too and see what they're up to. If you guys, any of you happen to live in Orange County and are looking for something to do, look about volunteering for OCHeart.net. I think there's nothing more rewarding than to be able to support the hospitals in your location. It's really something that's essential. They're an essential organ of your community when you think about it. Where's the first place that people go in an emergency? They go to a hospital. So it's an important thing to support. With that, that's my final slide. So back over to Dan. With that, I will stop sharing.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'll get up here and I will take the screen away from you. If I can find, there you are.
Yeah, go right ahead. Unpin me.
Unpin you. And so we can, I don't see, whoops, that changed things here. My background changed into a bubble. At any rate,
Oh.
Camera change. At any rate, I'd like to see some hands raising and some questions in chat. It's a great presentation. Thank you, Dennis.
Well, thank you, Dan. I appreciate that very much. It was an interesting experience, very, very telling. And I'm happy that I'm able to relate that and share it, because that's something that doesn't, I can't ever imagine that ever happening again. You know, it's like, who's ever been in a drill that turned into a real mass casualty incident, and especially a large mass casualty incident like that. You know, 300 passengers on a train involved in a train collision. That's pretty horrific.
Larry, you got your hand up there. Go ahead, Larry.
I had to unmute myself, couldn't find the right button. Anyhow, did you notice, Dennis, that after that you got an influx of new personnel that all of a sudden became, wow, this is a neat thing?
That happens. Yeah, we do have that happen. And we actively recruited for that group. That was a pretty specialized group. We had very, very specialized training. And we did, like I say, we did recruit actively with people that we knew from the ham clubs in the area. But yeah, we had people would come up and volunteer to be with us. You bet. In fact, I think that's how we got. I mentioned the disaster management, the disaster manager for St. Jude Hospital. He became a member. He and his wife both became members of HDSCS. They got their licenses and joined us. So that was pretty cool.
Okay, we got some questions popping up here in the chat also.
That's an interesting question right there. Yeah, you know, I think the first question up there is four drills a year. Well, yeah, I think so. These are big. This is for the hospitals. These are big drills. These are involving, you know, you think about the number of hospitals in the county divided up into 4 groups. 4 drills a year. That's a lot of activity going on. And yeah, we were you know, that's every 3 months we were doing something like this. Maybe not on the scale of the MCI, but we might be working with half a dozen hospitals or so, or with other agencies. So yeah, that worked very well for us, and it kept everybody trained and everybody ready, which was good. Weekly nets, and we used the nets as our weekly nets were also an educational forum. We would do training on the nets every week, and so that was a big deal. So hopefully, yeah, I think so. I think we all thought so. And it's interesting about the record of of tactical traffic. You know, Marty, that's a great question. I do not recall that. It's possible that April may have. I certainly was not contacted by anyone from NTSB or any other authority. So that's an interesting question. Today, you know, that would be a different situation for sure. We probably would have been having to keep track of all that. You know, I obviously keep notes of all my traffic, and everybody else keeps notes of their traffic, but we weren't requested to turn any of that in at that time. So not like today. Let's see, next question. To what extent did Aries and OC Heart? Well, I don't know that I can answer that. I think OC Heart is an Aries group, if I'm not mistaken. You can go to their website and find out about that, Dan. I don't know. You know, at the time, HDSCS and OC Heart didn't exist when HDSCS was in existence. So, you know, I suspect that OC Heart is an Aries group. I can't imagine them not being. And I'm sure they've got the same relationships with Red Cross and with RACES that we had back in those days. Well, that's an interesting question. Does that area have a problem with the press locking up all cellular activity? I don't know about the press locking it up. You know, in a widespread disaster, your disaster management organizations have the ability to lock up traffic on the public telephone system as the PTN, as well as on the cellular system by reducing their quality of service. So it means that higher priority traffic gets through the network. I don't know if the press would be doing that, but that's an interesting question. Can't really answer that, I don't think. But all I can say is that, yeah, the bigger problem we had were with loved ones, family members calling the hospitals and trying to get in touch with the Red Cross and in touch with Metrolink.
And Tom's got his hand up. Tom,
Yeah,
I was just going to say that I was the first arriving EMT at the Georgetown Junction train wreck between Amtrak and a CSX train. And as the first arriving EMT, it was pure bedlam. And one of the things that developed later in the incident was the press, in order to keep traffic open to their editors and so forth, had locked up every cellular signal you could get on that site.
Jeez.
And so the fire chief couldn't get a private or relatively private channel to discuss the fatalities and so forth with the EOC. And I was the culprit that said to the fire chief, I said, Chief, watch the top of engine 5, and when you see a bright light, hit send. And he said, how? I said, never mind, just do it. And ran over to engine 5 with a gimmick I had brought along for just the fear of this thing happening. It was a carbon arc light bulb. I plugged it into the inverter on engine 5, flipped the inverter on, and those of you who have ever messed with them know that they create a radio dead zone for all radio services several hundred feet across. They just do. But any radio within range of a carbon arc light bulb just can't function anymore, which means they lost their cell phone service immediately and comprehensively. And as soon as he saw the light go off, he hit send and he got through to the EOC. He didn't get back to me to ask how it happened for several days, but I had grabbed that thing on the way out of the door because I was at my car when the call came in. And it was my Elmer back when I was a novice who gave that thing to me by mistake, because he meant to give me a 150 watt light bulb in a cage that was for my dummy load. And he gave me the wrong box, and I'd had it ever since.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, of course, today, I mean, and for quite a while, the way that the emergency managers deal with that problem is just like I said, you reduce the quality of service of the network, and you give only certain individuals access to high priority traffic. And as a member of HDSCS, one of the things I had was from the Orange County Healthcare Agency issued key members, basically our assistant coordinators and coordinator, and some of our key members of the group. We were issued what looks like a regular old telephone calling card. But if the phone system is locked up like that, you basically enter a number and it raises your priority, is what it's doing in the phone network. So fortunately, I never had to use that, but we were required to test it once a month and make sure it worked. So that was kind of interesting. But that's how you deal with that today. That really isn't a problem. Of course, I will tell you, one of the problems I ran into, one of the very, very first incidents that I responded to with HDSCS was an earthquake. And it knocked out the power in one neighborhood around one hospital, and it took out the cellular service. I suspect what happened is that the cell site went down to batteries, and the batteries died. But nobody's cell phone would work after that earthquake. And the earthquake was nowhere near where we were. It was 120 miles away. But it caused an electrical failure in the neighborhood brought down the power for about a 10 square block area, including the hospital. And we were the only communications the hospital had because ReadyNet wasn't working. It had crashed. And they were on generators, but the HearNet wasn't working. And the HearNet wasn't working because they had the volume turned down. ReadyNet was down because the computer had crashed and they didn't know how to bring it back up. So the hams were the only communications that hospital had. Nothing was working. It was pretty crazy. So yeah, that's interesting though. But I like that. It's basically an ad hoc jammer is what it is. I like that, Tom. Thank you.
There's a couple more questions in the chat, Dennis.
Yeah, I was just looking at this one. It says, great presentation. Yeah, I think that's a great comment. I think everybody did handle the situation, a bad situation, actually a terrible situation, if you really think about it, calmly and professionally. And I think that's a testament both to the emergency responders in Orange County and also to our group, as well as Red Cross and OC RACES and the hospitals. It was a incredible response to that. But goals and recommendations, issues, did you identify which you are working on now? Okay, so that's a good question. For me now today, for what's going on down there, not very relevant, but every time we have something like that, every time there is an incident, we learn something. And like I mentioned early on, the one thing we learned right away is don't count on systems like ReadyNet to have the correct data. We found out immediately that it was the wrong data, that the dispatch of ambulances was being really fouled up by the fact that one hospital entered some data that was unrealistic. And the guys, it's kind of surprising the guys at Central Point didn't recognize that. They didn't see that and put two and two together, that number was impossible. For a drill, yeah, you might do that, but for a real event, no way. So that was bad. Let's see what else. Well, one of the things that we do know, and this riveted the point that hospitals like to say, well, we've got our handy talkies and we can use those handy talkies in an emergency. We've got the same thing with our hospital here in Ridgecrest. The thing is that unless somebody maintains them, that somebody practices with them all the time and does all of that, they're going to be useless in a real event. And that's the problem. Let me give you a perfect example of what can go wrong. We were doing a deployment at Children's Hospital in Orange County. The charge nurse on one floor, it was during a phone outage, by the way. It was a planned phone outage. We were doing a phone upgrade in the hospital. She has a handy talkie. The command post is trying to get a hold of her on her radio and they can't reach her. But every once in a while they hear from her. Well, when she needed something, she'd take the radio out, turn it on, make her call, get what she wanted, turn the radio off, stick it back in her pocket. So if anybody needed her, nobody could get in touch. So that's definitely a lesson learned and something to share with staff of your AHJs, that's not what you want to do. But at the same time, having a ham, an emergency communicator as a shadow communicator with, say, a charge nurse in a hospital is a good thing. And it's one less thing that charge nurse has to worry about in an emergency, that the ham, the emergency communicator, can take care of that. So that's definitely a lesson learned, not just from this incident, from many, many incidents that we had been involved in.
Brent's got his hand up, I see.
Oh yeah. And to continue on that question, the one thing I will share from my own perspective here, it's difficult, but regular training with your served agency, with your AHJ is important. We don't really get to do much of that right now because of the pandemic. We've kind of been shut down. We've done some tabletop drills with our hospital on Zoom, which was quite interesting. We do a monthly gathering of all the of basically all the emergency response in our community in Indian Wells Valley. It's all the volunteer organizations, police, fire, hospital, city services, the utilities and what have you. We get together once a month and have a roundtable discussion of what's going on. And so important thing about that is knowing who to talk to in a real emergency. And that really paid off when we had our earthquakes here in 2019. Everybody knew exactly who to talk to, what to do, where to go. So that communications is really important. So that's always a takeaway from these things. Having that communications channel, say to the hospitals, knowing the staff there, being integral part of their staff, being written into their emergency response plans, that's important stuff. And that's where we're trying to go here in our community with our hospital and with our EOC here. So it's in work. We're working on it. So thank you for that question. That was good. Let's see, back to, Brett, please.
Yeah, good evening. I just had a quick question, Dennis. When
Yeah.
when you have all your earthquakes and your fires down there and the exercise you just did you use WinLink at all?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the exercise we recently did, the shakeout, we absolutely used WinLink. WinLink, I will tell you, in fact, it's funny, we were just talking about this Tuesday night on the Rat Pack Planning Committee. I was totally against digital communications and emergency response at this time when this event took place in 2002. In those days, to me, it was the wrong thing to be doing because it took too many resources away from the emergency response. You had to have all these people to maintain all your equipment. You had to keep a packet network running. You had to keep all the computers running. You had to keep all this stuff going. WinLinks changed that. And I became a convert. Thank you to Oliver and his crew down in LA County or LA City, the LA County Northeast District Aries group. They made me a convert to WinLink. And I don't know how we'd survive without it today. It's our only communications path out of our valley here because we're surrounded by mountains and there are no repeaters that connect us to our county EOC, which is on the other side of a range of mountains that are the Sierra Nevadas, which are like 10,000 feet high.
Well, just one other question though. I just wanted
Yeah.
did you use hotspots at all when you're doing this? Like hotspots?
With the train wreck?
Yeah.
There was really no need to. It's all FM voice communications. The repeater, actually, one of the repeaters is located on the hospital I was at, so there's no problem. Orange County is reasonably flat. There's a San Diego Peak is kind of central to the county, and we have several repeaters up there that give us good coverage throughout the entire county, including down south into places like I mentioned San Juan Capistrano. It's kind of around the corner of the mountain heading down the coast. But through San Diego, we can get down to the San Diego Peak repeater on 220. We can get down to San Juan Capistrano. They weren't really involved in this drill because they're clear at the other side of the county. It was really just the North County. So we probably used 4 repeaters in the immediate area there. One at my place of work. That was our main repeater, was at Raytheon up on top of our building there. We had one at the hospital, St. Jude. There was one at the Anaheim City Hall is where another one of our repeaters was. And of course, the Red Cross and Racy's repeaters were up at Loma Ridge at the EOC. So yeah, no problems at all. And here's a recommendation to everyone. If you're not aware of this, if you're in a building like a hospital, a high-rise building of any kind, 440 is your friend for simplex communications. 2 meters just doesn't cut it. It won't work inside a building. 440 has the characteristic of being able to penetrate door frames, a closed door, a closed steel door. The wavelength is short enough that it can find its way through the doorway. So you can have pretty good communications in a high-rise building, and we relied on that a lot. The other thing to think about are crossband repeaters. I have actually I have several of them. An old Kenwood TM742, which is a out of the box crossband repeater. So you have it set up on 2 meters and 440. I can use 440 from the hospital. I can't get onto the main repeater because I can't get out of the building on 2 meters. So I get out of the building on 440 to my crossband in my truck, which then connects me up to the main repeater. And that's a nice setup. We've used that quite a bit. Generally, you don't have to, but yeah. Yep.
Thanks so much, Dennis. Greatly appreciate that, and nice to see you. And hope I've learned a lot, and I'm going to carry.
Glad to hear that. Thank you.
I'm going to carry it out here.
Let's pick up Tom real quick.
Yeah, Tom, go ahead. I see more questions in the chat too.
Yes. Tom?
One thing that I wanted to pass along is when we were so busy setting up triage and all of that, I saw a doctor in dress Army uniform, recognized the caduceus, and grabbed him, and I said, "You're a doctor, can you help?" And, I wasn't going to waste any time. He said, "Sure." And then one of the Aries volunteers that was there within like half an hour, and at the time I wasn't even a ham. This is 20 plus years ago. One of the Aries guys turned around to the volunteer he was sending to triage and says, "Remember that to that doctor, you're an RTO. If he says RTO, get over to him quick." And it stuck with me ever since that the Aries team leader that got there had taken the time to learn what the Army calls a radio operator.
Interesting.
FEMA calls us rados, but to
Yeah.
the Army, the Air Force, the Marine Corps were RTOs.
RTO.
So those term things can be a lifesaver. And it did happen several times that this doctor who is a career military man, he's habituated to say RTO and have somebody jump to his side with a radio.
Interesting.
And so it worked like a champ. But it was just that one thing, whose terminology you're going to need to know, and it's worth studying up.
It's very good. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. Let's see. Next question I see there is the type of radios. Yeah, these would have been commercial UHF. They're like Motorola. In those days, they were using Motorola handheld radios, commercial radios, not FRS. No. And the problem was that they're not maintained. You issue a radio to someone, you need to issue them a charger and make sure they are habitually keeping the radio in the charger. And that's an important aspect. So yeah, that was what the problem was. But the other problem is training. I can give you, here's a firsthand information of what can go wrong doing that. And my place of employment before I retired, we had an emergency network for building evacuations, and each floor in the building had a monitor, a floor monitor with a radio. When we would do a building evacuation, what their role was to announce that the floor had been cleared to whoever was in charge, the control point of the evacuation. Well, what happens when you've got, umpteen floors and everybody comes on at the same time? There was no protocol, no radio protocol. And one of the things that I got to do before I retired was I got to teach our team, our emergency response team at Raytheon in Fullerton, radio protocols in an emergency. And we conducted a drill shortly thereafter, and it went off without a hitch. There were no collisions on the repeater. It was fantastic. And that's the way it should go. You have to have a net control operator. The hospital doesn't have a net control operator, but you have yourself a net control operator, and the net control operator directs the traffic going on the net. So yeah, commercial radios, but they are a problem. And that was a problem, obviously a problem for St. Jude, probably some of the other hospitals in Orange County too during that event. I didn't hear anything to that event, but to that extent, but it certainly was a problem at St. Jude. Oh yeah, I absolutely agree, Steve, with your comment. Today, very much at the time, nobody was even talking about ICS 309s and ICS 214s in our group. I mean, in 2002, that was vaporware. If you think about it, we did have our own message forms that were tailored to the hospitals, and we had specific fields that were specific to hospital requirements. And I think today, absolutely, that would be the case. You'd be using 309 or 214, no question. And absolutely for liability's sake and for reimbursement. Absolutely. Keeping an activity log, very important for reimbursement for the authority having jurisdiction. So yeah, thank you for that, Steve. Yeah, those back in 2002, I don't even think those forms existed back then. I don't believe they did. These came some years later.
They did not.
Yeah, I didn't think so. But it's a great comment. And one that everybody should take note of that is that, yeah, you need to use those forms when you're whether you're doing an exercise, because you got to get familiar with them. But the real thing, you really need to keep track of that stuff with the forms. see, how many members have a wireless priority service card for cell phone access? Within our group, so we had roughly 100 members. There were probably about a dozen that had that. We had about 6 assistant coordinators plus an emergency coordinator. And there were several members who were very experienced, but not emergency coordinators. But those people were given they were part of core team response. They were principal responders in the. Oh yeah, Dan. Sorry, Dan's got his. Is it what year was that? That was 80s, right? Dan, sorry.
It's not very clear, Dan. I can't see.
Yeah, it's out of focus, but that's the handbook that he had. He was showing us a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. What's the year on that, Dan? Unmute yourself.
This was the basic ICS I-220 published in 1983, and it is NIIMS,
Yeah.
National Interagency Incident Management System.
That's it.
And the other documents were, how do I say it? There's nothing in here that's not also in ICS 300 and 400 now.
Yeah,
but
right.
there were no forms per se associated with this,
Yeah.
because every agency that was involved in this had their own protocols and training for how they did their communications, particularly.
That's what led to
And-
this.
Huh?
That's what led to this.
Yeah. And so
Fire
I found this in my garage while I was looking for some fresh grease for the tractor.
Yeah, that came out of something called Firescope that took place here in California back in the day, in the 70s. So yeah, that's cool. But yeah, that's a good point. The forms didn't exist back then. So we had our own forms. I keep track of my message traffic on a notepad, and I had my message forms. All of our members in our group were issued message forms. We had a template that we had made up, and we did have a specific message form. And it's good to have that, even for tactical traffic, because it helps you to remember, well, these are the things I need to record here, like who is this going to, who is it coming from, what's the priority, all these kinds of things. And in terms of, in fact, I was talking to Marty about this the other day at our planning meeting, in terms of medical supplies for a hospital, we would always use either NDC, National Drug Code, or UPC, Universal Product Code, like the barcodes that you see on products. Those are catalog items from their medical supply house where they get their material from that everybody's familiar with. So you use an NDC. It's a very, very specific item. It's a specific drug. It's a specific dose. It's a specific quantity from that NDC. If it's a different quantity, it's going to have a different NDC number. So that's kind of an interesting aspect. And that's part of eliminating the chance of error in doing your communications. If you're doing voice communications for a material request, resource requests, using NDCs and UPCs was very critical back then. Now with WinLink, I mean, that makes it very easy today. But back then, we didn't have that luxury. So it was good stuff. Let's see.
Tom has another question in the chat at the bottom.
Okay, let's see. Here we go. Yeah. I don't know the answer to that one, but possible to obtain external battery, extra battery packs. Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe somebody on here knows the answer to that. I'm not sure. Certainly for the radios that I use, I have the dry battery packs for my radios. That basically you've got an unlimited supply of power. Well, reasonably unlimited supply of power when your rechargeables go dead and you don't have access to mains power. But yeah, that would be interesting. I don't know. If anybody out here sees that, the question is it possible to obtain packs for primary, meaning expendable batteries, So those are like your dry cells, that type of battery. For commercial radios, other than the Kings, that Forest something work.
Yeah, ICOMs used to have, both the battery pack from ICOM as well as clamshells that you could put double A's in.
Okay.
For aviation and AM and FM.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. I don't know if Motorola, a lot of places use the Motorola radios. I don't know what Motorola has.
So what is it? There's several other amateur radios
Yeah, well,
20 years
Kenwood.
ago.
Yeah,
Also
Kenwood, Midland, I think, makes commercial radios.
So the answer is yes, typically.
Some of them have them, yeah.
Except what's happening now is that the density of the lithium batteries is so high, you can't match that. Except with, nobody's making battery packs for 18650s that I know of.
Okay.
Yeah, Steve, your comment about GETs and WPS, yes, and that's kind of what I was talking about with the reducing the priority of incoming calls, so that the bulk of that civilian traffic is reduced, so that the emergency responders can make use of the network. Yeah, that's a big deal, and that's what that card was all about. The access card. GETs, yeah.
Larry has a question.
Yeah, Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, getting back to the situation that you were involved in. Have you since recently playing with WinLink, et cetera, like you did during the earthquake? Now, we were trying to establish some communications with you from here at the Lancaster area, and I don't know if we got some telephonic or not. And would you say that would have been easier to try to contact you through WinLink?
Definitely. And in fact, I made a lot of contacts using WinLink with folks down in LA County and with the folks that were representing Cal OES, mainly because I'm on HF. Using WinLink on HF, I could pretty easily get into one of the HF gateways, RMS gateways. One of the problems and Oliver talked about that during his presentation, and I commented about it too, is that the amount of traffic on a widespread event could be really deleterious to WinLink. That's why you need to have majority of your traffic going through one or two control points that are metering that traffic out to, say, one or two RMS gateways, or you're just going to have a traffic jam. So there were probably many of us trying to get into the RMS gateways at the same time. There was a lot of traffic going that day on HF. So that could be a problem. But for, you all have, I'm not sure about High Desert, if you have access to a VHF packet network down there for WinLink or VARA network, VARA FM WinLink.
I think we have 3 gateways right now going. We're trying to look at a 4th and a 5th one. We're going to try to get one out in Cal City, even though they don't belong to us. It's all in a large flux. We're trying to expand it as much as we can because of our geographic proximities are similar to yours with your EOCs.
Okay. See, Dan, WL7 has a question. I think I answered your question though, right, Larry? Pretty much.
Yeah, you did.
Actually, two questions. First of all, 55 ambulances. There's not that many ambulances in this county or any 3 adjacent counties.
They had come in from as far away. We had actually had volunteers coming in from as far away as the Central Valley. There's a lot of ambulance. There's like 4 ambulance companies in Orange County. Plus we had some outsiders from other counties coming in to participate in that drill.
And so did the buses take the other 100 patients of the 264?
Yeah.
That didn't, those that didn't, the 164 that weren't transported by ambulance.
Right.
Okay, so the difference between that MCI and the recent one a couple of years ago in Las Vegas was that there were more transports by homey transport, just going from hospital to hospital until they found one with a shorter line.
Yeah.
Than there were transported by ambulances adhering to the MCI protocols. And
Yeah.
I've still not gotten to the bottom of what they're going to do about that.
Well, typically what happens is, and I can attest to this in some of the work that we did in Orange County. That's the job of that central point's job is to watch the basically the bed counts at the hospitals, right? And they're supposed to logically dispatch the ambulances to the hospitals in rotation, right? As a bed becomes available, okay, you send somebody there. Now in an MCI where you've got so many victims, that becomes kind of a daunting task. The other thing that you have to deal with in an emergency department is walk-ins. If you get too many too many beds taken in an emergency department, you go on what's called diversion, which means you're black. You can't take any more victims. So that control point, that central point would not be dispatching ambulances, but you still have to take walk-ins anyway, that you can't send them away. That could be a problem. But yeah, ambulances driving around looking for a place to drop off a patient. I don't think that would happen in Orange County. I really don't, because their system is organized such that would not happen. That would not happen.
It wasn't the ambulances driving around.
It was
people. The homey transport.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so the walk-ins.
Yeah.
So you can't turn them away. You even if a hospital's on diversion, they'll still have to accept a walk-in. So I got another Dan, K6DLC. You got a question? You got your hand up there.
Yeah, hope you can see it. Was so far a great presentation.
Thank you.
Dennis, I want to focus on one thing. You're talking about WinLink. Are you utilizing the WinLink system on the Southern California mesh network?
Not where we are. No, we can't. We don't have access to it from where we are. We're geographically isolated.
Well, how about the guys in Orange County? Are they using it? The people you?
I think they are. I think the guys in OC Heart are. I actually had a discussion with some of the members of OC Heart some time back, and we never did a follow-up on that, but they were looking into using WinLink and being on the Southern California mesh network down there.
Because we just got a WinLink system in the San Francisco Bay Area mesh network. We're up and running on that.
Congratulations, that's great.
Yeah, number two, we're going back to the Gets card. Are you on your application form for members? Is that one of the questions you asked of your member if they have a Gets card, just to keep track of who's got one, who doesn't?
Okay, when I had that, mine was issued by the healthcare agency, because in other words, they asked our emergency coordinator if we wanted to do, they thought it would be a good idea that we had them. So they went to our emergency coordinator, got a list of names, and they issued the cards to us that way.
Right. Well, my card is issued. My card is issued by a federal agency, which has my specific name on it.
Oh yeah, the same thing. Yeah, it was issued to me as an individual, definitely.
Yeah. But are you keeping track of those members?
Well, they kept track of it. When I left, when I eventually had to resign from the organization because I moved out of the area, I had to surrender all that. I had to surrender my identification badge that was issued by the healthcare agency, and I had to surrender my Gets card. Yes.
Well, there's some of us, like in my organization, I won't divulge what it is. We can go anywhere in the country. I can move to your community and still maintain my Gets card.
Interesting. Yeah, they didn't want us doing that. When I left the organization, I had to turn it in.
Okay, it's agency by agency.
Yeah, I think so, probably.
And one other thing, WinLink, just download. I just did the update. They just updated all the ICS forms on WinLink, so they're available now.
Well, did your card have your name in Morse code?
I like that.
Hey, Dad, I put it in Morse code because a lot of people can't read it. A lot of old timers who had it take the 20-word code. They love it, so I just put it there.
Did audit. Did audit.
Okay. How are you in the text area?
We're good.
No more hands up? Great presentation. Yes, yes. All right, folks, another good one.
Yeah,
And
thank you to everybody for attending and joining us. It's great. Appreciate it.
we kind of thought that Lisa was going to add something in there for a while. She said down next to you like she was ready to go, but we didn't hear from her.
Yeah, that's one thing. She wasn't a member. Well, we weren't together back in those days. We belonged to the same radio club. We were part of an Aries / Races group there. I had dual membership, but my primary membership was with Hospital Group, but she was not part of that group, unfortunately. But we were both part of the group down in Long Beach that was out of Long Beach Fire Department that we supported down there. Yeah.
All right. Well, unless there's some more comments or questions, we'll start wrapping this up.
Dan, thank you so much.
It's terrifying that you remembered what happened 20 years ago with such precision.
Well, you know what? I got a lot of notes, and I haven't done this presentation. I upgraded it, but I actually had a lot of the information at hand because I put this together soon after that incident as a presentation on the incident, but it's been updated with some new information like the accident report and a little bit more stuff about what went on. But yeah, I remember. I have vivid memories of what happened. Nightmares? No nightmares.
I have a lot of vivid memories too, but they don't always come to me when I like for them to be.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I never did get to eat my breakfast.
All right, well, probably should wrap this up. As always, when we close it down, you can come right back in again. The first person that comes in assumes the duties as the host. So that person, if he leaves after everybody else comes in, he should close it down again. But at any rate, come on back in and chat and enjoy the rest of the afternoon here. 73s, everyone. Thanks again.
Thanks, Dan.
Great presentation.
7-3 all. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everybody, for attending. It's great.
Stay safe, everybody.
Likewise. Yes. Stay safe.
73s.